All right, the day is upon us for the rapid removal sander shootout of 2020. So in my left hand, I have the Bosch. This is actually their second generation rapid or turbo removal sander. This is the GET75-6, the GET75-6. Of course, this is a 6-inch sander. On my right hand, we have the famous, well-loved, always desired Festool. This is the RO 150 FEQ. Festool came out with that to compete with this. Bosch was first in the market with their rapid removal sander long before Festool. And Mirka makes an equivalent sander that I don't have. And here's the deal. If I get 50,000 views over a course of about 3 months, if there's enough interest in the buying decision between and the performance and the benefits between these sanders, I will do another video with the Mirka 6-inch sander and compare the data to see who is best, who is not best, or maybe none of them are the best. Who knows? But this sander is $620 some odd dollars. This sander is $299 or $300. So this is over twice the cost. For twice the price, this thing sure as hell better perform significantly better. And significantly could be 30% better, but just a hell of a lot better, to be honest, right? For twice the money. And I also, by the way, will share with you at the end of this video the downsides to both of these sanders. And yes, there is a significant downside to them. And so let's jump into it now, get some testing done, collect some data, summarize the data, and then I'll share you with some more stupid opinions that I may have or may not have, or you may like or you may dislike. Either way, hope you like it.
So I'm both a fabricator and a woodworker, so this particular test method is a bit unique because it's focused on using hot rolled mild steel. Stay tuned because shortly I'll explain why I used mild steel. And oh, by the way, at each of these test method sections at the end, I will discuss the data, and then at the very end of this video I'll give you my conclusions and recommendations.
So this is the first one where we took tubular steel and removed the mill scale. Now mill scale is an iron oxide that is actually a protective layer on hot rolled steel so it avoids rusting when it's in storage. And mill scale, if you're a fabricator, mill scale can be an extremely difficult layer to remove. And so my initial thought was this was going to be a torture test, the most robust test to see which sander, regardless of dust collection capability, if I just put as much of a load on it, which one would remove the mill scale the quickest. And honestly, at 60 grit, they both did a fine job. So I did right here, you may see there's no data here, and the reason for that is I actually removed an outlier. So because, you know, ideally we would have an optic system which told me the start time and then the stop time, but I visually had to just observe when I thought the mill scale was completely removed. And if the standard deviations across samples 1, 2, and 4 are very, very close, except for this one here, and I think I just goofed here. So I'm going to eliminate this data set altogether and just look at these 3 samples. And when I do that, there's less than a 5% difference in removal time for the mill scale. What does that equate to? That's a wash in my opinion. It's not significant enough to matter. I mean, we're just talking about less than half a second on average between these 2 sanders. So they both did a great job.
We're going to use standardized MDF samples to measure both dust collection efficiency and also mass material removal. First, I simply secured these MDF samples to this table. Using each sander and applying a constant load, I then sanded for exactly 60 seconds. I then collected the excess dust particulate matter, and of course I weighed the samples both pre-sanding and post-sanding. Now let's move to the MDF mass material removal test. Now this is where we had the standard sizes of MDF, and then for exactly 60 seconds I sanded on them. Of course, prior to sanding I took a pre-sand weight and then a post-sand weight, and then we compared to identify how much MDF was removed. Festool on average removed 37.4 grams, the Bosch 35 grams. So less than a 7% difference. We're talking about approximately, 2.5 grams of material removed on the Festool side. It did a little bit better, but some of this could have been some operator error. It was hard to know that you were placing the same load on both these sanders. So I think that's where some of that variability comes into this data. So once again, it's a wash. I would call them both very good at removing material for MDF. Now let's go on to the dust collection of the dust mass remaining. So this is where after sanding for 60 seconds, I then collected the dust that was left over or not extracted across all these samples. And here's where I do think there is a difference, and that's really based on just my visual cues. There was more material or dust particles across all three samples on the Festool. The Festool, which really surprised me, did not remove material, the dust, quite as well as the Bosch. And I think overall, Festool has a history of designing superior dust collection systems, but I believe in the last 5 years that most of their competitors have really significantly caught up to them. And this is a perfect example of Bosch going to a second-gen dust collection system that's as good, if honestly not a little bit better than the Festool. So the data is showing that the Bosch, that the Festool had actually almost 50% more particles left over. Now, once again, I don't want this to be misconstrued, right? We're talking micrograms of dust here. I mean, this was 0.05 of a gram, which is probably very close. The resolution of my scale was 0.01. I couldn't even measure the dust on these two samples of Bosch. So when comparing, if we were comparing 100 grams of dust with the Festool to 50 grams, I would say, wow, that's a big difference. But because we're in the scale of micrograms, I believe that this really is a wash. For this fourth test, we're going to use Walnut, and we're going to remove 30 thousandths of the surface area and record the time. So these white lines serve as indicators of when to stop. Here in a second, when we talk about data, I'll go into more detail.
All right, good. So that part of this test is over, the rapid removal test. I recorded that data, and I'll be honest, I'm a little surprised at the test results. I think there is a clear winner here. So let's go ahead and go to the walnut removal test. Now, in a way, I'm gonna be inconsistent here. This is where I actually put a groove, a 30 thousandths deep groove, and I did this using a CNC, a multicam CNC we have in our shop, because I wanted that groove to be absolutely consistent. I then spray painted that groove with white paint to give me a visual indicator of when the 30 thou of material was removed.
Now, Walnut is much harder, without a doubt, than MDF. So in that soft material, you really couldn't see a big difference. But in this harder material like Walnut, there was a difference. The Bosch was about 30% more efficient at removing material. Why was the Bosch better? I really think for two reasons. One, it has a more powerful motor, as I said at the beginning. It's 25% larger than the Festool. And that just is going to translate to more material removed. But if I had to do this test again, the other impact which may have compromised Festool's results is that the sandpaper. I should have used 150 Abranet for both. I chose to use 120 because I thought it was just going to take a long time using a finer grit. This Mirka Gold actually has less holes in it overall than the Festool Rubin. So the sanding surface area is less, which could have easily impacted these results. So I do believe that both sanders at the end of the day may be equivalent. Once again, I'll hold those final recommendations and opinions to the end of this video.
All right, last test. So this one's easy. I'm simply gonna do an assessment for blemishes or the quality of the surface.
So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump back to Abranet. We're at 120. I want to use the same sandpaper on both of these because I want to take into account the sander's ability to finish finely. I don't want the sandpaper to play a role in these parts. So we'll go 150 Abranet, then we'll go 180 Abranet. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to time myself. So I'm going to sand at an equal duration across both of these. So I'm going to give myself 2 minutes to sand here at 150, 2 minutes at 180, 2 minutes at 150, 2 minutes at 180. All right, I'm at 180. I'm going to go ahead and bump this up one more grit to 220. Why do you ask? They both look just visually very consistent. I am definitely seeing, which I expect and experience with these sanders, some orbital, very fine, very uniform, what should be there, but orbital marks. So I want to go to a little finer grit to give these sanders both the best opportunity to be as blemish free as possible.
So now I'm simply going to apply an oil-based finish and do a really detailed assessment of the surface. I'm looking for any type of inconsistency from end to end of these boards. Now if you look at the right side, you will notice burnishing marks on the Festool sample. Well, guess what? The Bosch has it too, and I'll talk about this more at the very end of this video.
Is there a big difference between these two sanders? Absolutely not. No, no, no. There is not. And simply said, does the cost, the 2x cost of the Festool, along with the lifetime costs of the consumables, justify making a Festool purchase? In my very stern opinion, absolutely not. I think you're throwing money away. Performance-wise, they are equivalent. And I'll be honest, I didn't need to do all this testing to have already formed that opinion that they're equivalent sanders. I had used this for several weeks prior. Nothing stood out that it was a better product. There's a distinct disadvantage to both of them. Absolutely. These are not all-in-one sanders. You definitely need a fine finishing sander. The problem with these sanders is that they create burnish marks. That is where they are heating up the surface of the wood and basically creating a polished look. So you see polished lines. And that's just due to the nature of the beast. These things are high RPM, high torque machines intended to remove a lot of material, and with that comes heat buildup on the surface that translates to burnish marks. Now, how do you get rid of them? You can slow these sanders down and you can put them on their fine sanding setting to get the burnishing mark. So I guess from that perspective, yes, theoretically you could use them as all-in-one sanders. However, they are not, neither of them is well balanced. So that's where a fine finishing sander, they're extremely well balanced. You can literally use them with one finger and they're just sweet, and I love them. So we always jump to a fine finisher. We would do exactly what I showed you here, sand up to 180, sometimes 220, and then come back with a fine finish sander at a slower speed to remove any of the burnish marks. The other thing is this is not, neither of these is a blemish-free finish. There are no doubt very distinct, very fine, very uniform. Let me stress that. They are uniform and consistent, but there are orbital sand marks at 220 grit on both of these. There's no blemishes in terms of swirling that you may see in some sanders if you're not sanding correctly, or maybe you've got a particle in there that happened to create some of that swirling, some of that sawdust. There's no blemishes from that aspect. There's no swirls that shouldn't be there, but there are definitely these fine radial circumferential marks from these sanders, just from that's what they do. Where I will give the Bosch the advantage over the Festool, well, we saw it in the data. There's no doubt, in my opinion, that this is a superior dust collection system. The design, how Bosch did this, it collects dust better. Now, how much better, and does it make a difference in terms of the quality of the final product? No. So does it matter? No, it's not enough of an improvement to see it as an improved outcome in the product. So even though the data says, hey, it's better at dust collection, in practical terms, it's a wash. It doesn't matter. It's actually faster at rapid removal. That's what the data showed on the wood. How much faster? Significantly faster? That was the one thing that jumped out, that it was significant for the sanding time, but in the big picture, is this sander going to save you a huge amount of time over the Festool? No. But where the savings comes in is the cost, people. It's the cost. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm giving you some real life practical tips and feedback. Like it or not, you're wasting $300+ if you buy it, plus all the consumables. Buy the Bosch. It's just as good, unless you just love the brand and you want another one of their cases in your shop. So let me know what you think. Once again, if you want to see me review the Mirka, I'd love to do it. I'll compete it directly against the Bosch. We already know how the Festool fares. I've got to get out of here and go play some Legos with my kids. All right.